The winning blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room.
While you're here, go ahead and sub up. Welcome, you are in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me. Today we find out what's new in Baltimore with the reigning Super Bowl champion Baltimore Ravens. And this is courtesy of YouTube subscriber DJ ATL Philly. He's been trying for a while, finally got the Ravens up. I guess he could thank Double D, as he was up first, but he didn't post anything. And so DJ ATL Philly gets in, gets the Ravens up, and we'll be talking about what's new with the Super Bowl champions. They keep it relatively quiet in Baltimore, but this offseason, of course, we all know about the Flacco deal and we know about the shakeups in the roster. And so there is a couple of changes that aren't atypical of Baltimore, but it's the Ravens. So you know we're not going to go too far away from what they normally do. But if you're a Ravens fan, the beginning of the offseason was probably a little bit uncomfortable for you. Not what you're used to seeing from your football team and your franchise, but nonetheless, there is always one overriding theme in Baltimore, and that is simply we trust in Ozzie. And so, in Ozzie we trust is something that the fans always have to keep in the back of their mind, because Ozzie Newsome over the years has never let this franchise down as the general manager. So we'll be talking about Baltimore Ravens football today and what's new in Baltimore. But of course, before we go on, if you want your team, or any team for that matter, to be first or next up on the What's New In segment, simply be the first to leave a comment at the bottom of this video stating the phrase next and your team. Now you can dress it up whatever way you want. We got next, this team has next, or just next in the team. Does not matter. Either way, I need to see the phrase next. You got to be first. Drop it at the bottom of this video and they'll be up next on the What's New In segment. But today we're talking Baltimore Ravens. Before you can go in with the new, you got to go out with the old. And so let's get rid of what's gone in Baltimore. So we'll go out with the old in Baltimore. So in order to go out with the old, in with the new, of course, I need the assistance of two of my most trusted, handy, dandy tools. Of course, the big board behind me is one of them, and the second being that of my handy dandy pointer. I've got both, so let's get to the board and talk about the Beltway bullies, the Baltimore Ravens. We're going out with the old first, with the Ravens, and everything normally stays relatively the same in Baltimore, so not a lot of changes. But the roster has changed to a certain degree. And a lot of these players you'll find were key contributors in 2012 in that playoff run to the Super Bowl, culminating in a Super Bowl championship. And so the question you always have to ask yourself is, are these changes, are these losses to this roster going to really deplete this Ravens football team in their quest to get back to the Super Bowl again? You always have your faith in Ozzie Newsome, but in order to win in this league, you need veterans who have been there and done that and understand what it takes to win in this league. We'll talk about that at a later date and time. Let's get to out with the old with the Baltimore Ravens. So you start with fullback Vonta Leach. And Vonta Leach, for me, is one of those cog guys, one of those pieces that you don't talk about it much because, again, the fullback is a breed that is slowly dying off in the National Football League. Not everyone uses a fullback. Not everyone employs a fullback. But if you have a power running game, like the Ravens do, you need a really good fullback, a guy that is going to go in there and blow some things up and lead the way for a running back like a Ray Rice. And Leach is no longer in Baltimore. He's still floating out there, though. He's still around. There are several teams that want his services, including the Ravens. The Dolphins wouldn't mind having Vontae Leach on their roster. So there are some teams that are interested. He could ultimately wind up back in Baltimore, but right now he's not there. And I think the Ravens have to have a guy that's going to run block and catch it out of the backfield. Vontae Leach can do a little bit of both. So we'll see what happens with him. It's a solid piece that if they have it, great. If they don't, I don't think that it will tip the scales one way or the other. But he's definitely a glue guy, guy you want on your roster. He's going to do his job and do it extremely well. And so Vontae Leach no longer on your roster, but there is an opportunity. The door is still open for Vontae Leach to come back to the Baltimore Ravens. So we'll see how this situation irons itself out. You look at wide receiver Anquan Bolden. For me, for my money, this is the one that is going to affect this offense the most because Anquan Bolden came to this team for one reason: to help these guys win and get over the hump. He came to Baltimore to be that number one option. When he left Arizona, it was because he wanted to be the man. You can talk about the money aspect of things and Larry Fitzgerald getting a huge deal and him wanting more money in Arizona. He started lashing out in Arizona because he wanted to be the man. And he got that opportunity in Baltimore, and that's exactly what he was. When they needed a big play, they went to Quan. When the ball needed to be just thrown up in the air with really no direction, he'd come down with the football. And on that run to the Super Bowl, I think there wasn't a bigger contributor than Anquan Bolden. If you take Joe Flacco out of the equation, I think Anquan Bolden was really huge in the Ravens getting to the Super Bowl and ultimately winning the Super Bowl. And Joe Flacco's stats throughout the postseason were really padded because of a guy like Anquan Bolden. I mean, he went up and made some amazing catches in some of the most clutch situations in the postseason. And I think that Anquan Bolden is one of those guys that on this roster is irreplaceable. And the amount of money we were talking about for this guy to be back, yeah, he's getting up there in age and what he can do in terms of speed. And he was never a speed guy. He could run by you if you weren't paying attention, but he's a possession receiver with extremely, extremely strong hands, catches the football very well, plucks it out of the air. He's physical. He does all the little things. He blocks in the run game. I mean, it's hard to replace a guy like Anquan Bolden on a roster. And if there is one hole in this Baltimore Ravens roster going into 2013, for me, it's the receiver position because there are too many question marks, too many young guys. You don't want to rely on Torrey Smith as a number one. You look at some of the other guys they have waiting in the wings. You look at Jacoby Jones. Jacoby Jones is more of a number three option in an offense, not a number two. And so someone's going to have to fill that void left by Anquan Bolden. I think it's going to be a hard void to fill. And so we'll see what the Ravens do there. But they didn't address this in free agency, so they must feel good about what they have. We'll see how it works out. Look at offensive guard Bobby Williams. You brought him over last year to come and man up the guard position from the Cincinnati Bengals. He comes in, you realize that this guy isn't what you thought he was. He's getting up there in age. He doesn't move around as well as you would like him to. He isn't that strong in the passing game. And so Bobby Williams is a guy that you felt like, hey, you're fine in a backup capacity. You're not a guy that we necessarily want starting on this team. He wound up being in a backup capacity at season's end, and he was essentially along for the ride when it was all said and done. But he was a guy you brought in last year thinking he could be a veteran presence on this offensive line that could get it done. Ultimately, you ended up relegating him to backup duty. He's no longer on this roster, and so I don't think you'll see Bobby Williams in a Ravens uniform anymore. I think he's done in Baltimore, and so Bobby Williams is no longer on your roster. You look at center Matt Burke. Another one of these guys that quietly drifted off into the wind. He wins the Super Bowl. And we're talking about a guy that had about a 15-year career in the National Football League, never made it to the Super Bowl, comes to Baltimore for the final 3 years or so of his career, and he gets to ride out on that white horse with the Super Bowl ring. And it was probably very rewarding for Matt Burke to see his career culminate in a Super Bowl championship after all of these years. And he was a big part of it. I mean, he was the center for this thing. And he was just as solid this season as he has been over his 15-year career. And so a guy like Matt Burke, much like I talked about with Vontae Leach and maybe more so with Matt Burke, it's hard to replace a guy like this. The Ravens will have a young guy ready to go. I know they drafted Geno Gradkowski a couple of years ago, and so they'll have someone to insert at the center position when it's all said and done. But when you get veterans that understand the tricks of the trade, they know what to do, they know how to do it, they know how to go about their business. Hard to replace those guys, especially along the offensive line, because the offensive line is one of those positions where over time you may not be as fast as you once were, may not be as athletic as you once were, but you know all the tricks to the game. You know everything there is about angles and how to get here, how to beat a guy there that's more athletic than you, how to get away with a little grabbing and holding sometimes. You know all the little tricks of the trade, and Matt Burke owned every trick in the book. And he's going to be a guy that's missed along this offensive line. I don't know how much he'll be missed, but he was definitely a key contributor on that Super Bowl team a season ago. He is now retired, is Matt Burke, after 15 years of service to the National Football League. You look at safety Ed Reed. Wow. Never thought I'd see the day that Ed Reed wasn't wearing the black and purple. But that day has arrived. He is now a Houston Texan. And the Ravens are a team that they're looking to get younger. And all the good teams do this. At some point, you got to part ways with guys that either want too much money or aren't the same guy they used to be and can't help you in the capacity that you're looking for. I think Ed Reed kind of fits it both ways, although I think there's a lot left in the tank with Ed Reed. He's not the same safety he used to be. He's dealing with injuries, whether it's his back or it's his neck or it's his knee. You just never know what it is with Ed. He's got some lingering injuries. And also with Ed, he wanted a lot of money. He wanted to be paid handsomely. And the Ravens said, hey, wait a minute now. Let's take your age into consideration. Let's take your situation with your injuries into consideration. How about we get a little Ravens hometown discount here? Ed would have none of it. Ed said, look, I'm all about the bread now. Look, I got my ring. Now I need to be paid on my way out the door. And so he wanted to be paid. The Ravens said, hey, that's a little too rich for our blood. Hey, come back and talk to us if you can't find anything out there on the open market. He was able to find a team desperate to get over the hump in the Houston Texans. So now that's where Ed Reed resides. It's kind of funny. It really seems awkward that he's not going to be in a Baltimore Ravens uniform. We'll see how that Texans blue and red look on Ed Reed, but he's no longer a Baltimore Raven. That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of Ravens fans. You look at safety Bernard Pollard. Here's another starter from your 2012 roster that helped you get to the Super Bowl. And I thought this was one of those glue guys that a lot of people don't talk about, but he's one of those unsung heroes. You needed someone to come in and lay the lumber, Bernard Pollard. You needed a guy to come in and make a nice play, Bernard Pollard. You needed someone to help you in the run game, Bernard Pollard. I thought that he was one of those guys that did all the dirty work, did everything you needed to be done, and in a manner that was intimidating. And there's something to be said about that in the National Football League with all the rule changes and all the things you can and can't do. It's always refreshing to have that guy that can still play aggressively and do it within the framework of the football game. And yeah, Bernard Pollard walks that rope, that tightrope, and he teeters on the edge of what's right and what's not right. But those are the guys you need on your roster. Those guys that push the envelope a little bit are aggressive, kind of intimidate the opponent. And I think Bernard Pollard did that for the Ravens. He was everything you were looking for from a guy across from Ed Reed. I mean, everything that Ed Reed did really well and great, he did the opposite. And Ed Reed isn't the best tackler in the world. Bernard Pollard is. He's a great tackler. He's a guy that's going to come up and hit you. And so I thought he was the perfect complement to what Ed Reed brought to this football team. And so you're missing both of your starting safeties from a season ago. You're losing your starting center. You lost your starting wide receiver from a season ago. You lost your starting fullback. So it's not like they're getting rid of all of these guys and they're reserves, or it's a mixture of. We're talking about a lot of starters here, and we're not even done yet. So let's move on. Bernard Pollard is now in Tennessee with the Tennessee Titans. So a lot of these guys aren't even leaving the conference. They're still in the conference. They're just on another football team. So you look at cornerback Kerry Williams, and Ravens fans are mixed on Kerry Williams. I talked to some Ravens fans, and a lot of them feel like for the money that he wanted, he wasn't worth it. He's a guy that gets beat, and I like Kerry Williams. I don't really understand the hate here. I don't know if that is a byproduct of knowing this guy was leaving and he wasn't coming back, and so you tried to justify it or what. But Kerry Williams to me was solid, especially after the devastating blow of losing Ladarius Webb for the season. Someone had to step up at the cornerback position. And yes, I don't know if Kerry Williams is an elite number one, but I know he played like it in 2012. He played like a guy that wanted the challenge of checking the other team's best receiver. And I thought he stood up to that challenge more times than not. Yeah, he had his fair share of games where he was tattooed, but what cornerback does it? Every corner in the league has a game or two where he's off, and a guy across from him is just better that day. It happens. But Kerry Williams was physical. He's long. He's not afraid to tackle. He was always around the football, if not making a play on it. I like Kerry Williams, and I thought that he played really well. Now, is that the Kerry Williams that you'll get year in, year out? I don't know, because that was the first time that I saw Kerry Williams really play that kind of football, that aggressive, confident style of football. I don't know if it was because he was thrust into action and like, hey, you got to be the guy now because Ladarius Webb isn't here. You got to be the guy. Ladarius Webb isn't coming back. You're the man now. And so I don't know if that responsibility made him play better football, but you got to be wary of guys who step up in that contract year because you don't know if you're getting that guy all the time once they get paid, or is that really who he is? You know, we'll see. But he's now in Philadelphia. He's no longer a Raven, and I think the Ravens feel confident about letting a guy like this walk away because of all the stuff that they have. You know that Ladarius Webb will be back at some point. What will he look like? You're not sure about that. You also have Jimmy Smith, a guy that you feel really good about, and you think he's ready to take that next step. And so he's going to have a bigger role on this team. And Chalky Brown played solid for you last year. So you feel like you have some guys in place that can help you at the cornerback position, which will lessen the impact of Kerry Williams walking away. But we'll see how this secondary plays. We'll see how Kerry Williams plays in Philadelphia. All in all, he's no longer there, and there's another starter off of this Super Bowl winning team now gone. You look at linebacker Ray Lewis. Wow, Sugar Ray. Ray. We knew this ride was coming to an end, so this one is not a surprise. We knew that the day that he won another Super Bowl was the day that Ray Lewis would hang them up. And I think whether they won the Super Bowl this year or not, Ray was gone because the injuries started to take their toll. He wasn't the same linebacker. He wasn't the same on the football field. Emotionally, same guy you got from day one. He was the emotional leader of this team. He gave these speeches before every game. He was the guy that would rally the troops, get them in a huddle, and get everyone fired up. None of that ever changed with Ray Lewis. The passion and the love for the game of football never waned. But his ability to move sideline to sideline, yes. Father time, you can't beat him. You can't beat him. Once it's time, it's time. And that time had come for Ray Lewis. And so he dealt with all the injuries in 2012. He battled back, was able to participate and be a contributor down the stretch to that run to the Super Bowl. But Ray Lewis is not the same linebacker on the field. And so It was time for him to hang it up, call it quits, and he did that. But his contribution to this franchise, to this team in 2012, can't be measured. Cannot be measured. You're going to miss Ray Lewis, if for nothing else, for his emotional leadership in the locker room, a mentor of sorts for linebackers and other defensive players. And so Ray Lewis is a guy you're going to miss. You can't measure what he brings to the field. Not the same guy on the field, but you're going to miss Ray Lewis. Either way, he's retired. He'll be in the Hall of Fame in 5 years. He'll be in the Ravens Ring of Fame in 2013. And so Ray Lewis, no longer a Baltimore Raven, but he'll forever be a Baltimore Raven. You look at linebacker Brendan Iambadejo. If you've been following me, if you've been watching my commentary, then you know exactly how I feel about this and why it was done. I'm not going to go into that. He's not on your roster anymore. Key contributor on special teams. He's up there in age, so you can justify him not getting a job with the Ravens or around the league for that matter because of the age here. But I think he's still as productive as he's been, and I think he's a guy that can help you on special teams. But he's no longer in Baltimore, and I think I know why. But no more Brendan Iambadejo in Baltimore, so you move on to another linebacker, L.A.B, and this one stings because this is one of those guys you really want it back. And what I don't think a lot of people understand about this loss by the Ravens is that this guy is going into the prime of his career. Here's a guy that hasn't started 16 games for you, has never been that guy, and he started to assume that role. He had to because Ray Lewis was injured, and you knew Ray Lewis was on the way out of the door, and so someone had to step up, and that guy was L.A.B for the Baltimore Ravens. And realize this guy started about 7 or 8 games for you this year. So it's not like L.A.B started 16 games and he put up huge numbers. He started 7 games, played in about 14 or 15 games. He dealt with a little bit of an injury, and he was highly productive for you. He was your best linebacker at times this season. And you could argue was your best linebacker all season long. And to let this guy get away from your grasp, from your clutches, he could have been the new Ray Lewis for this football team. Not in terms of emotional leader on and off the field, but just from a production standpoint, he could have been the next big thing in Baltimore at the linebacker position. If it's one thing the Ravens do, and I will say this in their defense, is that they churn out linebackers. We saw them make Bart Scott into this huge figure and then let him walk to New York, where he played well for a little while, but it wasn't the same as he was in Baltimore. We saw what they did with Adalius Thomas. He leaves and goes to New England. He falls off the face of the NFL landscape. So the Ravens can find linebackers, turn them into stars, and then if they want to go and play elsewhere, they can. And so this could be another case of that. But I think, unlike those other guys that I mentioned, he wasn't on the Ravens roster for 6, 7, 8 years and then went to find a big payday somewhere else toward the tail end of his career. Here's a guy that's really young, and I'm talking 25, 26 years old young, going into the prime of his career. This is going to be his first time assuming the role as the man, playing 16 games as the starter. So you wonder if he can do it for a full 16-game slate, but you've seen enough. The sample size is big enough to know that this guy is the truth at the linebacker position. He should have been back with Baltimore, but the bread simply didn't match up. And so he's now in Miami. That's a huge loss. Another starter on this Baltimore Ravens team from 2012 that won the Super Bowl, no longer in Baltimore. You look at linebacker Paul Kruger, another guy that was a starter on this team, no longer with this football team. He's now in Cleveland as a Brown. The only thing I can say about the Ravens on this one in their defense is Paul Kruger getting $43 million over 5 years or whatever the deal was. It was somewhere in that general vicinity. You can't match that if you're the Ravens. That's a lot of money for a guy that hasn't proven that he can do it year in, year out. Now, we'll say this, much like L.A.B, there's a guy that only started 8 games or so for you. It's not like he went 16 games and got you 9 sacks. This guy got you 9.5 or 9 sacks in a span of a half a season starting, and he played in just about every game. But he wasn't starting. He wasn't getting starter snaps per se. And so to do that kind of damage in limited duty lets you know that if you can extrapolate that through 16 games, that's a dangerous man. I mean, you put Terrell, and you got to remember, T. Sizzle wasn't even on the other side. Terrell Suggs was injured for the better part of the season. So this guy was a one-man wrecking crew in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. You put Terrell Suggs on the other side and you allow Paul Kruger to be on the other side, which happened toward the end of the season, you've got problems. And so the Ravens would have loved to have hung on to Paul Kruger because they groomed this guy. They took him from a huge linebacker that you questioned whether he could flourish in the National Football League. They groomed him. They worked with him over a 3-year span or so and turned this guy into a pass rushing menace. And now he's off to Cleveland. But that was a lot of money. The Browns saw this guy twice a year and realized, hey, this guy is tough. This guy can get to the quarterback. We could use a pass rusher like Paul Kruger. They go out, they throw a ridiculous amount of money at him. And if you're the Ravens, you just got to say, hey, Paul, it's been nice. We'll catch you on the other side, brother. And that's what they did. They said, look, man, that's a lot of money. A lot of money for a guy that we like, but we're not sure if we love you that much. And so Paul Kruger now in Cleveland, another starter off of this football team from their 2012 Super Bowl run, gone. You look at linebacker Rolando McClain, and he was supposed to come in and help deaden the impact, soften that blow to all of these linebacker losses. You look at all 4 of these guys, 3 of them were key contributors on the defensive side of football. One was a special teams demon. And so you lose 3 starters essentially off of your Super Bowl winning team. You need to start replacing these guys. So you look to Rolando McClain to be one of those guys. You get him from the Raiders and you're thinking he was misplaced in a 4-3 defense. This is a 3-4 middle linebacker that was in a 4-3 defense out in space and he was exposed. At Alabama, he was allowed to run around in front of that huge defensive line. He was kept clean and he could go and make tackles. He didn't have that luxury in the NFL. They were asking him to cover. They were asking him to do things that he wasn't comfortable doing. So you figured if he gets back into a 3-4 defense, this guy could flourish. He's a hard-hitting, tough as nails middle linebacker that's great in the run game, not as great in pass defense, but if you ask him to do things and you put him in situations to succeed, I think Rolando McClain could be a more than adequate linebacker in this league. But then you had to deal with the off the field issues. This guy isn't mentally where he needs to be in order to be successful on the field. If you don't have your life off the field in order, a lot of times those things trickle onto the field and it really dips your production and limits what you are on the field. And I think that Rolando McClain was simply a guy that wasn't mature enough to handle being in the National Football League as a figure that's being paid a lot of money and having a lot of responsibility being put on his plate. He gets to Baltimore and he realizes my life isn't in order. I need to get my life straight before I can play football, which I think is a fabulous decision on his part. Get your life together, and if you still want to play football after you have everything in order in your personal situation under control, then come back. The NFL will still be here. You'll still be a relatively young man if you do this fast enough. You'll find work. Someone will kick the tires on Rolando McClain if he decides he wants to play football and he keeps his nose clean off the field while he's gone. But right now, the issues back home in Alabama can't have him. He's no longer on your team before he even takes a snap to help the Baltimore Ravens. Rolando McClain isn't on your football team anymore. So before he can even be a help, he's now gone from your football team. You look at defensive tackle Maake Kimiatu. There's a guy that left Baltimore, was probably at his best in Baltimore the first time around, leaves his free agency, doesn't work out in Carolina, doesn't work out in Washington, comes back to Baltimore, and essentially is your starter in the middle of your defense, which allows a guy like Haloti Ngata to kick outside. And I thought that Maake Kimiatu was solid, but he wasn't the same guy he was the first time around. The Ravens realized that he's getting older. He's not as agile and athletic, especially after that ACL tear. He hasn't really been the same guy. He was solid for you. He helped you in the middle of that defense, but keep in mind, this was one of the worst Raven defenses we've seen in a very long time, especially against the run. The Ravens gave up a lot of yards on the ground to some teams. The Cowboys rushed for over 200 yards. So did the Kansas City Chiefs. These are all things that are foreign to us watching the Ravens play. And so he was a part of that. He was a part of that unit that was getting gassed in the run game. And so I think the Ravens feel like we need to upgrade the defensive tackle position so that we aren't getting trampled over in the run game, because you can't win generally giving up those type of yardages. Luckily enough for the Ravens in 2012, the Steelers weren't the Steelers. And Cincinnati was probably still a year away from taking control, because if anybody would have stepped up in this division, the Ravens would not have won this division, and they wouldn't have made it to the postseason, because you can't give up the kind of yards the Ravens gave up on the ground and be a really good football team. You can't win that way in the National Football League, but they got away with it. No more Miyake Kimiatu. He's now gone off of your roster. So you look at the out with the old, and the thing that you take away from this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 starters. Count them. 10 starters. There are only 22 starters. 11 on defense, 11 on offense. 10 of them are no longer on this football team from a year ago. So even if you're thinking about repeating, it's not the same guys. It's hard to call it a repeat. It's not the same guys. So, and you know, it's a roster that I think will be replenished. The Ravens don't rebuild, they reload. And when you repeat, you do it as a franchise. But a lot of these guys that you're asking to help with this repeat don't know what it takes to get it done. They haven't climbed the hill once. How are you going to ask them to do it a second time? So it's going to be very interesting to see if Joe Flacco, Ray Rice, and all of those guys can take that next step and be leaders on this team and do enough to fill up some of these voids. And defensively, you could argue the Ravens will be better. We'll see. Let's talk about in with the new with the Baltimore Ravens as they look to find a way to offset 10 starters missing from their 2012 Super Bowl roster. All right, so I got a little freaky here with the yellow. You probably can't see it, but I can. I'll relay the messages to you. So we go in with the new with the Baltimore Ravens. We start with quarterback L.A.B. Haney. He comes over from the Denver Broncos, and I think this spells somewhat of a little trouble for Tyrod Taylor, because Khalid Haney isn't coming here to compete for the third spot on this team at quarterback. And I don't think the Ravens carry but two quarterbacks anyhow. So they didn't go out and get this guy because they feel like he can be the third option at quarterback. They went and got him because they feel like he can be a backup. He learned from Peyton Manning a season ago, and he was in Chicago before. I don't like Khalid Haney. I really don't. I don't think he's a guy that you necessarily want to turn your team over to for a 2 or 4 week stretch. The Bears had to do that. They did it in 2011, and he was part of the reason they fell flat on their face and didn't make the postseason that year. So I'm not buying Khalid Haney, and if I'm a Ravens fan, I don't want this guy on my team. And this is the thing: I don't know if the Ravens are sold on Tyrod Taylor or not. You know, and you can talk about not having to win, and they put Tyrod Taylor in at the end of the season against the Cincinnati Bengals. And it was a tryout of sorts for Tyrod Taylor and his Ravens team. Look, I know everybody wasn't playing and he didn't have a full deck, but you want to see them still win the game. You want to see him go out and perform well. And I thought that he was marginal. And I don't know how the Ravens feel about Tyrod Taylor and his skill set. You got to know that if something were to occur to happen to Joe Flacco, Tyrod Taylor and Joe Flacco aren't the same quarterback. They have a different skill set, and therefore I don't know if the playbook and the play calling have to change when one leaves the game and the other has to come in for him. With Khalid Haney, he's more along the lines of Joe Flacco. He's not as big, and his arm isn't nearly as strong, but he's more of a pocket passer. So I think that's what the Ravens are looking at. Maybe we need to have a guy on this roster that the offense wouldn't have to change a lot for if Flacco were to go down. I don't know. I don't know what the thinking is or rationale is here. Maybe they just want to push Tyrod Taylor and make him a better quarterback and let him know that, hey, you're not going to be one of these career backups that just sit around and get comfortable and fat and lazy. You're going to have to work for this backup job. And that might be the role that Khalid Haney plays. But if I'm a Ravens fan, I'm not impressed with Khalid Haney. I don't want him on the roster necessarily over Tyrod Taylor. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm not a big Khalid Haney fan. I don't think he's a guy that changes the game at the quarterback position. He's not a guy that's going to come in and for a 4-week stretch help you go 3-1 or even 2-2. I think he's a guy that goes 1-3 during that 4-week stretch when your quarterback is down and you got to rely on a backup to come in and keep the ship afloat. I don't know if Khalid Haney's that guy, but he's on your team nonetheless. Let's see if he makes the team and if he pushes Tyrod Taylor in camp. You look at defensive back Michael Huff. And you say defensive back because this guy is versatile. In Oakland, where he came from, he played corner and he played safety. I think he's more naturally a safety in the National Football League, even though cornerback was his position in college. I think you're going to use him as a safety strictly because you got to have safety help and realize that you lost both of your starting safeties a season ago. You got to bring somebody in to help you in a safety position. I think Michael Huff is that answer for you. And I think he's a really talented guy. Hasn't lived up to the pick necessarily. I think he was drafted 7th overall by the Raiders. Hasn't played like a top 10 pick, but he's been extremely solid. And now playing on a really good football team, expectations are going to be a little bit higher. Maybe this new change from Michael Huff is what he needs to take it to that next level because that's what everyone is waiting for with Michael Huff. We'll see if that change of scenery to a good football team that expects to win because he's been on a team that expects to lose, that doesn't have a lot of expectation in the Raiders. And so you can get complacent. You can start to fall into that rut. Now he's on a team where he's expected to live up to the tradition of the Baltimore Ravens winning ways. And so let's see if Michael Huff has that energy change and sees that this winning is infectious and starts playing really good football. We'll see. You look at defensive end, Elvis Dumervil. This is the biggest offseason pickup for the Ravens right here. I mean, this one immediately fills a void and also gives you a guy that you could argue is a step up from what you had a season ago. And this is crazy how he ends up on your roster. This shouldn't even be happening, but it did. And I tell you what, you lose Paul Kruger, but you say to yourself, Paul Kruger, Elvis Dumervil, you could argue that Elvis is a little better. So if you're talking about from a production standpoint and longevity and understanding angles and leverage and how to get to the quarterback, then it's not even a competition. Elvis Dumervil is better because he's done it more consistently for a long time in this league, and you know he's a double-digit sack getter. On the other hand, Paul Kruger hasn't eclipsed double digits in sacks yet, but he's younger, way younger, with a lot more upside than Elvis Dumervil has. And so while you could argue you're getting a more experienced pass rusher that you know is going to get to the quarterback, Paul Kruger was still somewhat of a question mark, but he was younger, more upside, and he just got you 9 sacks in limited duty. So you could expect that, hey, this guy could probably get double-digit sacks in this league. We'll see. But Elvis Dumervil is a known commodity, and he comes in and he upgrades this defense right away. You got a steal here. You had no business getting your hands on Elvis Dumervil. So if you're a Ravens fan, wow, did we luck up or what? The Broncos lost on this one. The Broncos really dropped the ball here, allowing Elvis Dumervil to be on the street and end up a Baltimore Raven. But this is a huge move for the Ravens, and it definitely helps. Losing all those linebackers, you need to replenish it somehow. Here's a guy that's going to help you do exactly that. You look at linebacker Darryl Smith. Here's another solid veteran linebacker, this time from the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this is a veteran team, is the Baltimore Ravens. They infused it with a lot of young, talented guys. But this offseason, I felt like while there's still a relatively mixed team with a lot of young, talented guys, a lot of guys waiting in the wings, and your slew of veterans, I feel like this offseason, they got older. Like a guy like L.A.B, young, going into the prime of his career. A guy like Paul Kruger, young, going into the prime of his career. You lose those guys, and you bring in Elvis Dumervil, who's been in the league for about 6 or 7 or 8 years. You look at Daryl Smith, a guy that's been in the league 8, 9, or 10 years, and you're replacing guys that were going into the prime of their career with guys who may not be in the prime of their career anymore. In the case of Daryl Smith, he's definitely not in the prime of his career anymore, but can still help you. Daryl Smith is one of those consummate professionals that you plug him in, you put him in the field, you leave him alone, and he'll get you 90 to 110 tackles. He'll do his job. He'll do it well. He'll be where he's supposed to be when he's supposed to be there. You'll like Daryl Smith and what he brings to the table. But again, can he replace a guy like L.A.B? We'll see. We will see. Because there are some big shoes to fill in the interior of this defense at the linebacker position. I'm not sure if Daryl Smith is a guy you want filling that or not. We'll find out. You look at defensive end Marcus Spears, big defensive end. I think he's a prototypical 3-4 defensive end and extremely solid. Not going to knock your socks off, but for as bad as the Ravens were against the run last year, they could use a guy like Marcus Spears to come over and help with this defensive rotation because I felt like they were lacking on that defensive line last year. They had a slew of injuries at the linebacker position, which did not help their situation. But up front is where it's at in a 3-4 defense when talking about stopping the run. And they didn't stop the run well last year because their defensive line was not in check. And so Marcus Spears is going to help you with that in terms of stopping the run. He won't get to the quarterback necessarily, but he can help you stop the run. You look at defensive tackle Chris Canty, he's an interchangeable part, and these are guys you love to have because he's versatile. Chris Canty can kick outside to 5 technique at defensive end, or you can plug him in the middle at 6'7", 320 pounds. He's more athletic for his size than you'd imagine, and he can move around. You can do some things with him. Extremely strong at the point of attack. Not sure if he can stand up to double teams or not, so I don't know if you want to put him at the nose tackle position per se. You drafted a guy like Brandon Williams, who we'll talk about here in a second. And so I don't know if you expect Brandon Williams to come in and start right away. I doubt that. Maybe he will. Who knows? But you look at Chris Canty and what he can do. He can play 5 technique. He can play at the nose. I love the move. I love the move getting him from the Giants. I didn't think he was a natural fit in a 4-3 defense. I think he's a guy that in the NFL fits better in a 3-4 defense. And I think he could excel with the Ravens. I really do. I think he's a guy that can help you. He can get pressure on the quarterback. He can stop the running game. He's very stout at the point of attack. I like Chris Canty. I like the addition to the Baltimore Ravens roster. I think it's a solid move all the way around. So you look at all these moves. Those are your moves in free agency to help the Baltimore Ravens. Now you look at draft picks. And the Ravens were busy. Ozzie was busy as usual, acquiring draft picks, adding talent to this roster. And you look at some of these draft picks, and the Ravens are counting on these guys to start right away. Because of all the losses, we talked about it, 10 losses to starters a season ago, you got to replace them right away. So some of these guys, pressure is going to be on them to come in and produce right away. So you look at, and if you're looking for an extensive breakdown of these players in the draft of the Baltimore Ravens, I will redirect you to the 2013 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series that I've done on every team in the National Football League, including the Baltimore Ravens. So if you're looking for a breakdown that is thorough of each and every single one of these players, that's where I will redirect you, 2013 NFL Draft Wrap-Up. So safety Matt Elam, he's got to start. You're expecting him to come in and start. And he's probably going to be across from Michael Huff, and you're looking for these guys to really come in and play football as a tandem, much like Ed Reed and Bernard Pollard did a season ago. Linebacker Arthur Brown, he's probably going to start in the interior of this defense. Again, another guy that's probably going to have to be thrust into action early on. Maybe he doesn't start right away. He's dealing with a little bit of an injury right now, but if he's ready for camp, great. If he's not, he might be a little bit slow to catch on, may not start right away, but he's a guy that you're looking to take over in the interior of this defense. You look at defensive tackle Brandon Williams. I just spoke about him. He's probably going to be a guy that you're looking to plug in at that nose. Don't know when he'll be ready to do so, but Again, another guy that you'll be looking at. You look at linebacker, defensive end, John Simon out of Ohio State. Another guy that could see some action. You don't know. Fullback, Kyle Juszczyk. Part of the reason why a guy like Vontae Leach might have been a little bit expendable. Who knows? Offensive tackle Ricky Wagner, defensive end Capron Lewis Moore, love that guy out of Notre Dame. Offensive tackle Ricky Jansen in the 6th round as well. Wide receiver Aaron Millett in the 7th round, as well as cornerback Mark Anthony in the 7th round. So Ravens very busy in this draft, getting a lot of players that they feel can help them right away. I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or 6 of these guys ended up being starters before seasons end, just because of how many people they lost and them needing guys to step up and fill in voids right away. So I think a lot of these guys have an opportunity to make this roster. 6 or 7 of them are locks to make this roster. The other 3 could either make it or hit the practice squad, but you go from guys that are locks or have a very high probability of making this roster to those who are scratching and clawing just to make a dent on an NFL roster in terms of undrafted free agent rookies. So we'll run down the list of these guys and then we'll move on from there. Running back Mo Lee out of Utah. Wide receiver Rashard Carter out of Tusculum. Wide receiver Amarius Hines out of Florida. Wide receiver Marcus Rivers out of Buffalo. Wide receiver Gerard Shepard out of Townsend. Tight end Matt Furstenberg out of Maryland. Defensive back Brendan Treadwick out of Troy. Defensive back Gary Walker out of Idaho. Offensive tackle Joe Unga out of Midwestern State. Offensive tackle Rogers Gaines out of Tennessee State. Offensive guard Jordan Dewey out of Memphis. Linebacker Brandon Copeland out of Pennsylvania. Linebacker Meshach Williams out of Kansas State. Wide receiver Marlon Brown out of Georgia. Defensive end William Parakick out of Colorado. And rounding out the group, defensive tackle Cody Larson out of Southern Utah. 16 in all, guys pushing, trying to make this roster. We'll see if they can make a dent on this Ravens roster. Very veteran-laden and very talented group of individuals already exist on this team. Going to be very hard for these 16 undrafted free agent rookies to crack this roster, but you never know. These guys are here for a reason, and Ozzie Newsome is very strategic in finding these guys and bringing them in to work out with this team. So if you come in, you could be the next L.A.B, a guy that wasn't drafted that ends up being someone that ends up on this roster and ends up getting a huge payday down the road. You just never know. And that's why you got to come in and work hard. So you go from in with the new with the Baltimore Ravens to any philosophical changes for this Ravens football team in 2013. So you look at any philosophical changes for the Super Bowl defending champions, the Baltimore Ravens, and there aren't many changes to discuss in terms of philosophy. You had Cam Cameron as your offensive coordinator in 2012. Things didn't go right. They lose to the Redskins in overtime in a game that they had, you could argue, well in hand, and then things just kind of fell apart. The Ravens really struggled on offense for about a 4-week stretch in the middle of the season, and they ended up changing offensive coordinators. You bring in Jim Caldwell, the ex-head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, to kind of right the ship. He was already on this staff. They bumped him up, and things started to change. It got better on the offensive end, and you don't expect much to change from there. You're going to get a steady diet of the run game with Ray Rice and Bernard Pierce. You're going to see this passing game transform. I think in 2013, something that may be a philosophical change of some sort might be the fact that these tight ends are going to have to be included in the offense a little bit more. You look at Dixon and Pitta, these are guys that are going to have to step up for you in 2013. I mean, I thought that Dennis Pitta was huge in that run to the Super Bowl. Ed Dixon, not so much, but he's there. He matters. He makes a difference. And I think you're going to have to use him a lot more in 2013 because I'm not sure you have the horses out wide right now. And I hear Ravens fans talking about Deontay Thompson. You drafted Aaron Millett, and you've got Tommy Streeter from a season ago who basically redshirted. I'm not buying any of those guys right now. I need them to show me that they belong in the National Football League. I'm not buying any of those guys out wide. None of those guys are number one options. Even if they were to help, they wouldn't be able to step in and assume the role of number one receiver. So I think that is going to be relegated and dumped off on the shoulders of Torrey Smith, who I don't feel is a number one receiver in this league. I thought he was a great complementary piece. But anytime you start taking guys out of their element, and I think everyone right now, if no one steps in at the number one or two spot, everyone's going to have to be bumped up. When I think Torrey Smith, regardless if someone steps up, is going to have to be bumped up into the number one spot because there's no one else to take on that role. So I think he's going to have to do it automatically. Then you look at a guy like Jacoby Jones, who I think is a slot guy only. I don't think you want Jacoby Jones out wide at all. And he's probably going to have to be your number two option until someone steps up and assumes the role of number two receiver. And so, even though you've got a lot of young guys on this roster that could compete and possibly see a lot of meaningful snaps in 2013, and eventually someone will have to assume that role, or the Ravens will have to go out onto the street and look for someone to come in and help. I really don't know. I'm not really that comfortable with the Ravens situation at receiver. I'm just not. And so I think Dennis Pitta and Ed Dixon are going to have to step up at the tight end position. And I thought Dennis Pitta did that anyway a season ago. He's starting to come into his own. And I see Flacco really relying on him a little bit more heavily, being that there will be no more Anquan Bolden on this offense. I think that the tight ends are going to have to really step up and be more like a New England Patriots type of attack, where the tight ends are a huge part of the offense. And then you kind of spread the ball around to any guys you have out there at the receiver positions. Expect Ray Rice to catch it out of the backfield as well to kind of take some of the pressure off of the receivers, I should say, you have out wide. And so I really see the Ravens having to find ways to disperse the football because of a loss of a guy like Anquan Bolden. You won't really see the difference that Quan made until you get into the season and realize we don't have a true number one and guys are out of place. The reason why this is so big, and I think Ravens fans are trying to downplay it, and that's what you do as a fan. You downplay things because you're scared. No one likes change. Some people have embraced it. I've heard some Raven fans embrace change, and that's good. But the unknown scares people. When you don't know, it's scary. And I don't know right now what the Ravens are at receiver. And I don't know these guys that they have at receiver. I don't know what Deontay Thompson brings to the table. Seen flashes, I'm not sure though. I don't know what Tommy Streeter is in the National Football League. He was redshirted last year. I don't know what Aaron Millett can do for you. He was a 7th round draft pick. So I don't know what the Ravens have at receiver, so I'm not comfortable right now with the Ravens receiving corps. So we'll see what the Ravens are able to do offensively. You look at defense. I don't think they can be much worse in defense because we're not used to the Ravens not being a good defense. And they frankly weren't a good defense in 2012. So I look for them to be better on defense. You get rid of some aging veterans in Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. And look, Ed Reed is one of those guys that's irreplaceable. He makes plays. He's always around. Quarterbacks have to be wary of where this guy is because if you make a mistake, Ed is going to make you pay. That factor is no longer in the Ravens secondary right now because you're not sure if the guys you have in that secondary are playmakers. If Ladarius Webb comes back, great. That's a huge lift to your secondary. I don't think he'll be ready for training camp, but I think he'll be ready to play when the season starts. You look at the safety position, you got Huff and then you got Elam coming in, 2 new starters. So there's going to take some time for some continuity and some gelling to happen in that secondary. But once it does, maybe they'll be really good back there for the Ravens. But that playmaking ability, I don't know if either one of those guys can be Ed Reed in that sense. I know Matt Elam quietly makes plays, but he's a smaller guy. So I don't know if he's going to be the same dynamic back there. I know this much. For as many guys as you lost in the offseason, you brought in some guys that can help, and you also drafted really well. The problem that may exist, though, is it's going to take some time for these guys to get acclimated to the speed of the NFL to make that leap from college to the NFL and to fit in and be cohesive as a unit. The faster that happens on the defensive side of football, because your defensive coordinator, Dean Pease, is going to use these guys, have them put in positions to highlight their strengths. He's not going to put guys in a position that has them out of place or has them in a position where they're vulnerable. He's going to put guys in positions for them to flourish. How fast will this team, specifically on the defensive side of football, be able to gel? That's the question you got to ask yourself. That's a question that is going to loom over this Ravens team. Elvis Dumervil, he's going to fit right in like a glove. I expect him to pick up where he left off in Denver. He's going to come in. He's going to get pressure on the quarterback. I'm not worried about Elvis Dumervil. Not at all. He's a veteran. He knows what to do. I'm talking about the rookies. I'm talking about Matt Elam. I'm talking about Arthur Brown. I'm talking about Brandon Williams. These are all guys that are going to have to play meaningful snaps for you this season. How fast will they make the leap, the transformation from college player to NFL player? That's the question you got to ask on the defensive side of football. But look, until someone knocks you off of the top of the hill, guess what? You are the Super Bowl defending champion Baltimore Ravens. And so, with that being said, that's what's new in Baltimore. Like the content? Want more? Sub up.